That was a pretty cool, like, burnt witch corpse kind of scene, huh? That was cool shooting that. But anyway, that's what we're making today. We're taking a skeleton and we're going to turn it into a burnt corpse. So this will go over the corpsing techniques to get it to look like that. Let's get started. For this tutorial, for this video, I'm going to be using one of these cheap store skeletons, right? And you can adjust the quality of the skeleton depending on what your needs are, right? If you're doing a movie, get a fancier one. If you're just doing some home decoration, then this will suffice. First thing I'm going to do, though, to improve the skeleton, because some aspects, the quality is not that good, is with the face. And one of the things I'm going to do is replace the teeth, and I'm going to put some eyes, because on this particular prop, even though it looks like it was burnt, I want to leave the eyes that are kind of like looking as if the soul stayed behind and is going to look judgingly at whoever burnt it. So I'm going to replace the eyes. I'm going to be using these guys right here. Well, these are pretty bright and cartoony, so I'm going to tame them down. But that tutorial on how to make eyes I already did, and it's linked below. The other thing I'm going to do is make some new teeth, but there's also a tutorial for that I'll link below as well. Let's get started. First step, I'm going to grind off the top teeth. And I'm going to leave the bottom teeth. I'm not too worried about that. But the top ones, I'm going to grind the top 6. Okay, I'm going to replace those. Now, there are many ways to do this. I'm using my Dremel tool, okay, with these metal bits. And these are an old bit, but it will still cut through plastic, no problem. And make sure you wear eye protection. And if you're lifting too much dust on this, then just wear a respirator or a dust mask. That looks good. So to attach the teeth, and I have the teeth here, and like I said, there's a tutorial for it. These are made out of like thermoplastic beads, but we're going to attach them with Apoxysculpt. There's a 2-part epoxy putty type thing. You mix equal parts of A and B, and then you have about actually like an hour of work time, and then it starts hardening and it becomes solid as a rock. It's really heavy though, so use it sparingly. So I'm going to build some gums here where we carve the teeth out, and I'm going to put a couple globs of it where the eyes are going to go. Right, 10 grams right here, and $10 grams of B. I'll mix that 2 parts really well until they look one color. Now there is a bone and white colored Apoxysculpt that would be better in this case. This, all I got is the gray kind, so we're going to have to paint it a little bit. Alright, I'm going to save a couple pieces for the eyes. Alright, so for the gums, I'm just going to press this against that space right here. I'm giving them the same shape as it had before we cut the teeth out, which is kind of rounded. And you can smooth this out quite a bit, and if you get some water, that'll work to smooth it out as well. So let's start with the teeth. Well, let's start with the front so we don't mess those up. See that? Nice little tooth right there. So let's put the other one. That looks fantastic. I'm going to polish up the gums here a little bit, just with my fingers with a little bit of water so that they meet the teeth correctly. And then we move to the next thing. Another thing I wanted to do was to get a little bit of a ridge on this nose. It's supposed to be kind of, I wanted it to be kind of like a witchy thing. So I thought it would have a bigger bone structure right here. You don't have to do this. Remember, this is your prop. You make it look exactly like you want it to. Now that I got the ridge of the nose, just gonna put a couple globs right here in the eye. I'm gonna drill a hole though through the eye so that the Apoxysculpt grabs the eyeball. Now I'm going to align the eyes so they look like they're looking straight out. That's looking fantastic. All right, I'm gonna let that cure. It's gonna take a long time. While all this stuff cures, I am going to take some of this 5-minute epoxy. I'm gonna mix a little bit. A little glob, not too much. And another little bit right here. These are equal parts. And I am adding some white, it's called transparent white airbrush color. This is going to give us a glaze for the eyes. And you don't need a ton because it will darken the eye a lot. So let's mix this real well, just like that. And I'll take a little bit on this eye and a little bit on this eye, just like that. Let's even them out so they look symmetrical. Okay, now let's take this brush, just kind of like smooth it over the iris. And this is just going to make the eye a little bit cloudy. This 5-minute epoxy tends to self-level, so it'll be nice and shiny. And as you can see, the eyes are nice and milky. Let that set. This is looking awesome right here. The Apoxysculpt is nice and set, solid. So now we can start corpsing this guy. For the first layer of corpsing, I am using some of this sheeting. This is just from the dollar store. It's used to like cover the floors when you're painting so you don't get paint everywhere. And the first thing I'm going to do is wrap it around the head and neck. Okay, and I'm going to use my glue gun to tack the plastic in some spots where I think it should be tacked. For example, the edge of the jawbone right here, maybe on the cheekbones, around the eyes, anywhere where you don't want the plastic to move and kind of be like an anchor spot. Also down the middle of the nose, etc. Now we're going to wrap it up and then we're going to get the heat gun and shrink it onto the skeleton. And I want the seam in the back because I don't care too much about the back. Plus, if you need to add hair or cover it with something else, you can. So I'm going to start the seam in the back, wrap it around the front. All right, here we go. And I'm going to start here on the top of the back because I'm going to overlap it when we corpse this area as well. I'm going to add a few dots where I want it to stick and put it there. It doesn't have to be too tight because we're going to shrink wrap it around the whole skull. I am particularly interested around the eyes, because that will make kind of like the eyelids, and here on top of the nose, along the nose ridge, lips, and the outside here where we didn't put any teeth. Excellent. So get a couple drops here on the forehead just to hold things in place. I'm going to cut the excess off, which we can tack down. This looks good. So I'm going to continue with the rest of the body, and we'll do the heat gun after we're done with everything. For the hands, the trick I've discovered is to use these guys. They're like super cheap. They even have them at the dollar store, because that way you don't have to wrap every finger individually. Just like that. We can tack it up here. The same on the other hand. Great, let's keep going. Now let's do this part. Now for the thorax, for the core, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tack the plastic all the way up the spine, but I'm also going to tack it in the corners right here up on top of the shoulder blades, and I'm going to tack it to the neck as well. I'm going to start right here, top of the shoulder. So you can see I'm overlapping the head plastic so that we don't have any empty spaces. After we have all this tacked, we need to go under this arm and wrap it around the chest. Similarly, let's tack up here so that we have the flesh coming all the way to the top. Right there. All right, don't miss tacking your thorax here, your sternum. This will hold everything in place so it doesn't slide around. Right, and one of the things I really like when corpsing is when there's this space right here with some membranes between here and the pelvis, right, the hip bone. So I'm going to also tack stuff here, 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 and around. Let's take this, put a line of glue right here. You don't need to keep this very tight, but keep it a little bit stretched. All right, that looks good. So I'm going to trim this about here. And we're going to tackle this tailbone and some of these vertebrae. All done. There we go. That's looking perfect. Now, I'm not going to bore you with it, but I'm just going to wrap the arms and the legs. I have this guy wrapped all the way from foot to head. So now I'm going to take the heat gun, and we're going to shrink this plastic all onto the skeleton. Now be careful, too much heat will just melt it outright. You just want it to start getting nice and tight against the skeleton, okay? Some parts I will want to have some burns through, like between the ribs on a few of them, so it looks like the flesh has broken. Also a hole here in this cavity where the organs go, and then a more controlled cut where the mouth and the eye sockets are. All the rest will be just shrink wrap. Now I don't mind some of the pieces that are hanging because it's supposed to be a burnt skeleton, so flesh that is hanging is okay. For some of these areas that I want a hole in, if you want it to be like a natural cut like the mouth or the eyes, use a knife, right? So you have a straight cut, because those are usually areas that are normally open. But if it's something like a rib here, use like something pointy and just kind of like drag it like that, and then hit it with the heat gun, and it will give you like a really cool fleshy tone. Let's do the face now. So here I'm going to just very carefully cut just a little bit of the plastic. And then we're going to guide this as it shrinks. So if you needed to go over the teeth, we could pull it up and so on. I also want the nose to be visible. And this one we gotta be careful with is the eyes. And hit it. And careful with these teeth, because this is thermoplastic beads, right? Which means it'll melt with heat. This dude is corpsed all the way with the plastic sheet. So now we go to the next step. So for that step, we're going to use some of this great stuff, expanding foam, right? So this is like spray foam that you use to seal cracks, but make sure you wear gloves, because all that is warnings and all that is warnings. This stuff is not good for you on your skin or anywhere. So let's put some gloves on. Now this stuff expands a lot. So it would be like totally puffy, and this thing will look like a marshmallow, a giant marshmallow, and that's not what we want. So what we're going to do is we're going to spray it in our hands, right? And then we're going to rub it all over the whole skeleton, and that will give you a little bit of a thinner layer, right? Because you'll pop some of those bubbles out, and also you'll have some parts that have no foam and some parts that do, and that's the part that will make it look like burnt flesh. All right. So we can also spray it on the skeleton and then rub it in. Now some parts of the body will be fleshier. So for example, here on the stomach, where the organs go, make it a little bit fleshier. where the fingers are, a little less fleshy. So rub this a little bit thinner and a little bit thicker on the other areas. And be careful with the face also. So we're going to very carefully rub the foam around the fleshy parts of the face. Some of the other parts you don't have to, right? That's what the face looks like now. Now let's see how this goes. Better. All right, so simple. Spray the foam and rub it in. And this will expand at different rates, so you're going to have to regulate that with your hands. I'm going to do the top first, and then we'll let it cure and flip the skeleton over. You can rub it on the inside as well if you want, you know, some fleshiness towards the inside. So it's up to you. Let's do the arms here. Show you what I would do is just put the foam there and then just rub it, because this stuff is going to expand and it's going to make it fleshier. Very gentle around the hands, because they will puff up too much and you won't recognize them. I'm doing the head now, and like I said, very thin, right? This will expand anyway. Look at that. You will ruin your shirt, so use an old shirt. After you apply it, leave it, or it won't have a chance to expand. See how it's expanding here? If you totally collapse it, eventually it'll be just a coat of like sticky stuff all over. So after you rub it thin, just don't mess with it anymore. Don't forget legs and arms. This pelvis going here, back of the pelvis. Make it nice and thin on the joints, that way you can still use the joints. And if you need to articulate the skeleton, it will work. Right, this thing should cure a little bit in about 15-20 minutes. I'm going to leave it about half hour, then we'll flip it over and do the backside. And just get rid of those. You're not going to reuse that. We'll get fresh ones when we do the backside. This side is totally cured, as you can see. Not sticky anymore. One thing you can do, if you get some big pieces, like this right here, or this right here, you can trim them with a little knife if you want it to be not so big, but it can look like a boil if that's what you like. So now we're going to flip this over and do the same to the other side. Now I'm not doing anything differently. I'm just going to spray this on my hand with gloves, rub it all over, and we move to the next step. This looks great. Now let it cure all the way. This is nice and cured, as you can see. Looks great. Now, for the base layer, I'm going to use red paint. So I have this sample I bought. I just picked the red that I wanted. This way. Or we can use spray paint. Either way, it's okay. I'm going to use this until I use it all up because it's inside. It's like 95 degrees outside. So I'm just going to brush it on. And I'm going to brush it on all the parts that are fleshy, that I think should be red. But I'm going to leave some parts unpainted where I want it to see the bone from the skeleton, right? But anything else that is flesh, just paint it red as your base coat. I'm going to use a fine brush to paint around the face so that we don't, paint over the eyes or teeth or any of that. The color of this foam is very organic, so it also looks like gristle or fat. So I'll take advantage of that and paint it in thick in some parts and thin in some others. This thing looks really red, huh? So the next step, I'm taking some black latex. This is satin black acrylic latex. Any black paint will do. And I'm going to use a foam brush, and the reason I'm using this is because it sits, doesn't get between the details, right? So when you paint, it just paints the top, it doesn't get in between. And we're going to start painting the top of this with black. That gives it that burnt look, right? While leaving the recesses bright red like the flesh. So let's do that. I'm going to pour this on a little tray and start painting over this. Keep the brush not too soaked with paint so it doesn't drip into the cracks. Instead, you're just painting the very top of this detail. You can decide how much of the black or how little, depending on how charred you want the body to be. Just like that. Keep going all over your skeleton. I'm also using this chip brush that I cut some of the bristles off, so it's nice and stiff to get just a little bit deeper in some areas, right? So if you end up with an area that just has very little of the black paint, you can get a little bit deeper in between with this. This is looking great. So I'm gonna let this dry, and once it's dry, I'll decide if it needs more black color or not, and I'll adjust it as needed. But right now we have this bright white teeth, so I'm gonna go ahead and age those. For that, I'm using some alcohol inks. It's just brown. Let me show you. So I'm using this airbrush paint. This is brown. I'm just going to mix it with a little bit of rubbing alcohol to make a stain, and we're going to stain these teeth so they look nice and yellow or brown. For the stain, I'm going to use a tiny touch of the paint, like tiny, like barely touching it. See? And I'm going to go with this over the tooth until we get to the darkness that we want. Making it darker in between the teeth. While that dries, I wanted to thank all of my patrons from Patreon for supporting the Monster Tutorials channel. From the bottom of my heart, thank you. It's because of you that we have all this supplies, skeletons, tools, computers, cameras, everything. So thank you so much. Check out how it turned out. Pretty cool, huh? Let's go back to the studio. The only other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this 5-minute epoxy. I'm going to add it to the teeth and the eyes for two reasons. One, it makes them look wet, and two, it will just secure the teeth onto the gums and the eyes so that they don't fall off if the prop is bumps into something. So it kind of will put the teeth permanently where they are, and it'll give it that shiny look. This was a fun project. If you think that was fun too, consider subscribing if you haven't already, and give it a like and share with your friends. So that's how you corpse skeleton using spray foam. That project can be done much quicker if you skip like the shrink wrap. And if you skip, for example, the eyes and teeth, that can be done. You can do 2 or 3 skeletons in one day that way. It's just foam, paint, and you're done, right? So pretty easy way to make a whole scene of like burnt corpses. I hope you enjoyed that. I will see you in the next one. I'm Eduardo Talbert, Yumi, we're all the Prop Mob. This is Monster Tutorials. I'll see you in the next tutorial or video or something. See ya.